The atmosphere inside the arena wasn't electric, it was pressurized. There is a distinct difference between the anticipation of a main event and the palpable anxiety of something going wrong. And on this night, the air felt heavy, like the humidity before a tornado touches down. The show had been running smoothly, perhaps too smoothly, following the standard rhythm of scripted violence and predictable victories that the audience had come to expect. But 20 minutes before the final bell was meant to ring, the production trucks parked in the loading dock went into a frenzy. Feeds were cutting in and out, not due to technical failure, but due to frantic human override. Inside the arena, the crowd, usually a collective organism of chants and cheers, began to fracture into confused murmurs. The champion stood in the center of the ring, awaiting a scheduled challenger, but the challenger's music never hit. Instead, the house lights didn't dim, they flickered, an awkward, unplanned stutter that bathed the first few rows in a harsh, unflattering white light. This was the first sign that the script had been discarded. Usually, a surprise entrance is telegraphed by the sudden kill of the lights or the screech of feedback, a theatrical pause designed to elicit a pop. This was different. This was the uncomfortable silence of a play where an actor has forgotten their lines, leaving the entire cast stranded on stage. The referee tapped his earpiece, his face shifting from authority to genuine confusion, a look that cannot be taught in performance center drills. You could see him mouthing words to the timekeeper, asking a question that clearly wasn't being answered by the panicked voices in the production truck. The commentary team, usually quick to cover up botches with seamless banter, fell dead silent. It was the silence of employees who suddenly realized they were witnessing a breach of contract unfold live on international television. The fans in the front row stopped looking at the ring and started looking at the security personnel. The guards, usually stoic statues and windbreakers, were abandoning their posts at the barricade and converging toward the tech area. There was no pyrotechnics, no video package on the Titantron, and no dramatic countdown. There was just a sudden, jarring shift in the energy of the room. It felt dangerous. It felt like the barrier between the carefully curated world of sports entertainment and the chaotic reality of the outside world was dissolving. The champion in the ring lowered his hands, breaking character completely, his eyes darting toward the entrance ramp not with aggression but with legitimate concern. The camera operators, usually steady and precise, began to shake, caught between following their directed shots and capturing the unfolding anarchy. Then, a low, guttural noise began to rise from the cheap seats, not a cheer, but a collective gasp of recognition that rolled down the stadium tiers like an avalanche. He did not come from behind the curtain. The multi-million-dollar stage set, with its LEDs and hydraulic lifts, remained dark and dormant. Instead, he emerged from the crowd, specifically from the concourse level near the hard camera, wearing civilian clothes that looked slept in. There was no merchandise, no logo, no branding. He wore a hoodie and jeans, looking less like a superstar returning to glory and more like a ghost haunting the building that built him. The security team at the stairwell froze. In a standard wrestling angle, security is prop furniture. They are meant to be pushed aside to make the star look strong. Here, they hesitated because they didn't know the rules of engagement. This wasn't a skit. This was a man who had been legally barred from the premises, walking down the aisle with a terrifying, hollow focus. The unauthorized nature of the walk made it feel violently intrusive. He moved without the rhythmic swagger of a wrestler. He walked with the heavy, plodding gait of someone marching to a funeral. As he descended through the crowd, the fans didn't reach out to touch him. The usual sea of outstretched hands parted, creating a vacuum of space around him. They were filming with their phones, but they weren't cheering. They were documenting a crime scene. The commentary feeds finally crackled back to life, but the voices were stripped of their broadcast persona. You could hear the genuine tremble in the play-by-play announcer's voice as he muttered that they needed to cut the feed, pleading with the producer to go to a commercial break. But the cameras didn't cut. The spectacle was too magnetic. He reached the barricade, usually the sacred line of demarcation between the spectator and the performer. He didn't vault over it with athleticism. He stepped over it clumsily, his boot catching the foam padding. It was unpolished and gritty. When he finally stepped onto the ringside mats, the silence in the arena was deafening. It was a void where noise should have been. The lack of entrance music stripped the moment of its pageantry, leaving only the raw sound of his footsteps on the hollow floor and the hum of the arena's ventilation system. He didn't look at the cameras. He didn't acknowledge the hard cam. He didn't play to the crowd. He looked directly at the man in the ring, his eyes dead and unblinking. It was the look of a man who had nothing left to lose, a man who had burned every bridge and was now standing in the ashes, daring the world to stop him. The referee abandoned the ring entirely, sliding out under the bottom rope, realizing he had no authority over what was about to happen. This wasn't a match anymore. It was a confrontation. The collision of realities. The moment he slid under the bottom rope, the suspension of disbelief shattered. In professional wrestling, there is an unspoken agreement of cooperation, a physical language where two bodies work in tandem to create the illusion of conflict. That agreement did not exist here. The champion stood his ground, but his posture was defensive, his hands raised not in a fighting stance but in a gesture of de-escalation. The intruder stood 3 feet away, invading the personal space that wrestlers usually protect fiercely. Without a microphone, the exchange was entirely physical, a dialogue of micro-expressions and tension. The intruder didn't strike, simply stood there, breathing heavy, ragged breaths that were audible even without amplification. He looked exhausted, carrying the weight of years of exile, lawsuits, and public scrutiny on his shoulders. The crowd realized that no one was in the control room. The Titantron remained black. The usual graphics identifying the wrestler were absent. This visual emptiness made the scene feel naked and voyeuristic. We were watching a private dispute spill into a public arena. The intruder reached into his pocket, and for a split second, the entire arena flinched, fearing a weapon. The security team flinched. The champion flinched. But he only pulled out a crumpled piece of tape wrist, tapen slowly, methodically, began to wrap his hand. It was a ritualistic act of preparation, performed with a chilling slowness. He was preparing for violence, but on his own timeline. The commentary team had stopped talking entirely, leaving the broadcast in dead air, a cardinal sin in television that only amplified the severity of the situation. Then came the sound. It wasn't a punch, it was a voice, unamplified, shouting from the ring. The intruder screamed a single sentence at the champion, a sentence that the microphones barely caught, but the context was clear. It wasn't a catchphrase. It was a specific accusation about loyalty and betrayal, referencing real-life events that the dirt sheets had speculated on for years, but had never been confirmed. The champion's face dropped. The mask of the character fell away, revealing the hurt of the man beneath. This wasn't a storyline being advanced. It was a wound being ripped open. The crowd, realizing the gravity of the words, didn't chant, "This is awesome." They fell into a hush of uncomfortable reverence. They were witnessing the destruction of a legacy in real time. The intruder stepped forward, forehead to forehead with the champion, and the air in the arena felt like it was going to snap. It was the most intense moment in the company's history, precisely because it felt like it wasn't supposed to be happening. The aftermath and the wreckage. When the feed finally cut to black, it wasn't a clean fade. It was a hard chop, followed by the jarring, upbeat music of a sponsor commercial. The abruptness of the transition only confirmed that the network had panicked. But the story didn't end with the broadcast. In the modern era, the show continues on social media, and the digital aftermath was catastrophic. Within minutes, shaky cell phone footage from the audience began to flood the internet. These unauthorized angles showed what the broadcast didn't. The intruder being swarmed by plainclothes agents, the champion kicking the ropes in frustration, and the genuine arguments breaking out between the producers at ringside. This wasn't viral marketing. This was a corporate crisis bleeding out in public view. Backstage, the environment was toxic. Reports began to leak immediately, not from the usual sources, but from frantic staff members texting their contacts. The locker room, usually a brotherhood of shared sacrifice, was divided. Some saw the intrusion as a disrespectful hijacking of the show, a selfish act by a narcissist who couldn't stand to be forgotten. Others saw it as a revolution, a necessary shock to a system that had become sterile and overproduced. The champion, interviewed in the parking lot by aggressive paparazzi, refused to comment, his usually charismatic demeanor replaced by a stone-faced anger. He looked like a man who had been assaulted, not physically, but emotionally. The line between the performance and the person had been erased, and the toll was visible on his face. The media chaos that followed in the next 24 hours was unprecedented. Major news outlets, not just wrestling blogs, were covering the security breach. Stock prices fluctuated. Statements were drafted and retracted. The intruder remained silent, issuing no tweets, no videos, no explanations. His silence was weaponized, allowing the public to project their own narratives onto his actions. Was he a savior returning to fix the industry, or a bitter ex-employee looking to burn it down? The ambiguity fueled the fire. The company was in a bind. They could fire him and risk him becoming a martyr, or they could capitalize on the buzz and put him on television, effectively rewarding his insubordination. It was a moral dilemma wrapped in a business crisis. The locker room watched the door, waiting to see if he would walk back in, and fearing what would happen if he did. The reflection. Ultimately, the entrance that didn't follow the rules forced us to confront why we watched this theater of violence in the first place. We claim to want storylines, athleticism, and entertainment, but what we truly crave is the crack in the facade. We are addicted to the moment where the script fails and the raw, messy humanity underneath is exposed. The intruder didn't use pyrotechnics or entrance music because he didn't need them. He understood that, in a world of manufactured moments, reality is the only thing that truly shocks. He brought the baggage of his real life, his failures, his ego, his desperation, and dumped it in the center of the ring, forcing us to look at it. The lingering question wasn't about contracts or storylines. It was about the cost of fame and the inability to let go. The entrance felt heavy because it was the walk of a man who was addicted to the roar of the crowd. A man who would break into the house he built just to feel the warmth of the lights one last time. It wasn't a triumph, it was a tragedy. We cheered for the chaos, but we ignored the pain required to create it. The uneasiness we felt in that first chapter, that static in the air, was our own conscience warning us that we were about to witness something exploitative. In the end, the company capitalized on it. They turned the breach into a storyline, sanitized the anger, and sold it back to us on pay-per-view. The intruder got his contract, the champion got his match, and the fans got their spectacle. But for those few minutes before the lawyers and the writers got involved, it was real. And that reality was terrifying. It remains the most viewed segment in the company's history, not because of what was said, but because of the silence. It reminds us that the most captivating stories aren't the ones written in a creative meeting, but the ones that escape from the darkness when no one is looking. We watched a man break the rules, and in doing so, he proved that the rules were the only thing keeping the monsters at bay.